Asterisk. The first and most decisive battleground of stress is not the marketplace, the household, nor the court of public opinion. It is the quiet, unseen chamber of the mind. Long before anxiety takes visible form in trembling hands or restless sleep, it is conceived in thought, nourished by imagination, and magnified by unguarded reflection. The mind, when left without discipline, becomes a stage where fears rehearse endlessly, replaying misfortunes that have not yet occurred and exaggerating those that already have. To master stress, one must therefore first master the internal dialogue that gives it life. Thoughts arrive uninvited. They drift into consciousness like travelers passing through an open gate. Yet, while their arrival is not always within our command, their residence certainly is. A person who believes every thought deserves attention soon becomes a prisoner to the loudest and most alarming ideas. Control begins when one learns to question each thought's legitimacy. Is it grounded in reality or merely in speculation? Is it constructive or is it draining vitality without offering solution? Such questioning transforms the mind from a passive receiver into an active judge, capable of filtering the useful from the destructive. Many individuals suffer not from events themselves, but from the interpretations they assign to those events. A delayed message becomes a sign of rejection. A minor mistake becomes evidence of personal failure. A stranger's indifference becomes an insult. These are not facts. They are narratives invented by the mind in its attempt to predict and protect. Yet these narratives often wound more deeply than the original circumstance. When a person learns to distinguish between what has actually occurred and what has merely been imagined, a significant portion of stress dissolves immediately, for the mind ceases to wrestle with illusions. To control one's thoughts does not mean suppressing them with force or pretending that unpleasant ideas do not exist. Suppression only buries anxiety deeper, allowing it to resurface with greater intensity. True control resembles stewardship rather than tyranny. It is the gentle yet firm practice of acknowledging a thought, examining it, and deciding whether it deserves further attention. Just as a wise host does not allow every visitor to linger indefinitely, a disciplined thinker allows only those ideas that contribute to clarity, wisdom, or necessary action to remain. A useful habit in cultivating such control is the deliberate pause. When a stressful thought arises, the immediate instinct is often to react. Emotion surges, conclusions form, and worry accelerates. By inserting a moment of stillness between thought and reaction, one interrupts this automatic chain. In that pause, the mind regains authority. The individual can then assess the thought with calm reasoning instead of emotional haste. This single habit, though simple in appearance, gradually reshapes mental patterns, replacing impulsive anxiety with composed evaluation. Language plays a powerful role in how thoughts influence stress. The words one uses internally can either soothe or inflame. To think, "This situation is impossible," creates a sense of suffocation, whereas reframing it as, "This situation is difficult but temporary," introduces space for resilience. Such subtle alterations in phrasing do not distort reality. Rather, they prevent exaggeration from distorting it. The disciplined mind speaks to itself with precision and fairness, avoiding catastrophic language that intensifies distress. Another essential aspect of governing thoughts is recognizing their impermanence. Many people treat thoughts as fixed truths, when in reality they are fleeting mental events, changing with time, mood, and perspective. Observing how a troubling idea can feel overwhelming in the morning, yet insignificant by evening, reveals its unstable nature. This awareness diminishes the authority thoughts seem to possess. Instead of reacting as though each anxious idea carries permanent significance, one begins to see them as passing clouds, visible, sometimes dark, yet never capable of anchoring themselves in the sky indefinitely. External influences constantly attempt to occupy the mind's limited space. News, social comparisons, idle gossip, and relentless digital noise all compete for attention, often delivering content designed to provoke fear or dissatisfaction. Without careful selection, these influences infiltrate the thought process and shape perceptions in subtle ways. A person who wishes to reduce stress must therefore become selective about mental nourishment, just as one would be selective about physical diet. Consuming information that is sensational, pessimistic, or trivial trains the mind to dwell on turmoil. Choosing material that is insightful, balanced, and purposeful cultivates stability. The practice of redirecting attention is equally crucial. When a distressing thought repeats itself without offering resolution, continuing to entertain it serves no practical purpose. Redirecting attention toward a constructive activity, whether it be focused work, physical movement, or reflective reading, interrupts the cycle of rumination. This is not avoidance. It is strategic reallocation of mental energy. By engaging in tasks that demand concentration, the mind shifts away from abstract worry toward tangible action, reducing the intensity of stress through purposeful engagement. Over time, the consistent exercise of thought control reshapes the architecture of the mind itself. Patterns of catastrophizing, self-doubt, and needless comparison weaken through lack of reinforcement, while patterns of calm evaluation and rational optimism grow stronger. What once required conscious effort gradually becomes instinctive. Situations that previously triggered immediate anxiety begin to evoke measured consideration instead. The individual who cultivates this discipline experiences a profound sense of internal autonomy, recognizing that while the external world remains unpredictable, the internal response is no longer at its mercy. Such mastery does not eliminate challenges, nor does it promise a life free of difficulty. What it offers is something far more valuable: the ability to encounter adversity without surrendering mental equilibrium. By governing thoughts before they spiral into distress, one preserves clarity, dignity, and effectiveness, even in demanding circumstances. The mind, once a source of turbulence, becomes an instrument of composure, guiding actions with deliberation rather than panic, and allowing the individual to move through life with steadiness even amid uncertainty. Human suffering is often intensified not by the harshness of reality, but by the relentless resistance we offer to it. When circumstances unfold contrary to expectation, the mind instinctively rebels, crafting endless objections, rehearsing alternate outcomes, and clinging to the illusion that events should have obeyed personal preference. This resistance, though seemingly natural, becomes a silent architect of stress, constructing tension where acceptance would have allowed calm to settle. Reality operates according to laws far older and more powerful than individual desire. Seasons change without consulting human plans. People act according to their own motives, and unforeseen disruptions arrive without warning. To expect absolute control over such a vast and intricate system is to invite constant disappointment. Acceptance, therefore, is not surrender to weakness, but alignment with truth. It is the recognition that energy spent fighting what cannot be altered is energy wasted, draining both clarity and strength. The mind often confuses acceptance with defeat, imagining that to accept a situation is to approve of it or to abandon the pursuit of improvement. Yet these are separate matters. Acceptance simply acknowledges what is presently real. It does not forbid action. In fact, clear acceptance creates the only stable foundation from which meaningful action can arise. A person who denies reality wastes time arguing with facts, whereas one who accepts it can immediately begin to adapt, adjust, and respond with intelligence rather than frustration. Stress flourishes in the gap between expectation and reality. When expectations are rigid and reality diverges from them, the mind becomes trapped in a cycle of comparison: what is versus what should have been. This comparison breeds resentment, impatience, and sorrow. not because the present is unbearable, but because the imagined alternative appears more desirable. By loosening the grip of rigid expectations and approaching life with flexible anticipation, one narrows this gap, reducing the friction that generates emotional strain. Every moment spent wishing the past were different is a moment invested in an impossible negotiation. The past is sealed, immune to argument, and untouched by regret. Yet countless individuals repeatedly revisit previous events, replaying them in memory with the desperate hope that analysis might somehow alter their outcome. This mental rehearsal does not heal. It merely reopens wounds, forcing the mind to relive discomfort that no longer exists in physical form. Acceptance of the past releases the mind from this exhausting loop, allowing attention to return to the only realm where change is still possible, the present. Similarly, attempts to control the future beyond reasonable preparation cultivate unnecessary stress. The future is shaped by variables too numerous and complex for complete prediction. When one insists on certainty before moving forward, anxiety grows with every unknown factor. Acceptance of uncertainty, by contrast, introduces psychological flexibility. It acknowledges that while careful planning is wise, absolute foresight is unattainable. This acknowledgement transforms uncertainty from a threat into a natural condition of life, reducing the fear that arises from unmet predictions. Relationships provide one of the clearest arenas where the refusal to accept reality breeds tension. People often expect others to behave according to personal standards, reacting with anger or disappointment when they do not. Yet each individual carries unique experiences, beliefs, and limitations that shape their conduct. Demanding that others consistently meet one's internal script creates perpetual conflict. Acceptance of others as they are, not as one wishes them to be, does not mean tolerating harmful behavior, but it prevents the unnecessary anguish of expecting uniformity from inherently diverse human minds. Nature itself offers a silent lesson in acceptance. The tree does not resist the wind. It bends and survives. The river does not argue with the terrain. It curves and continues. These natural forms endure precisely because they yield where resistance would cause breakage. Human beings, endowed with intellect, often forget this simple wisdom, choosing rigidity where adaptability would ensure peace. By observing how the natural world accommodates change without turmoil, one gains a model for graceful coexistence with forces beyond control. Language again shapes emotional response. When faced with an undesirable event, phrases such as, "This should not be happening," or "This is unfair," ignite frustration because they imply that reality has violated a personal contract. Reframing the internal dialogue to "this is happening. Now how shall I respond?" shifts focus from protest to problem solving. The event remains the same, yet the emotional atmosphere surrounding it becomes less volatile, creating space for reasoned decisions rather than impulsive reactions. Acceptance also preserves dignity. Continuous complaint and resistance often lead to behavior that appears desperate or undisciplined, eroding self-respect and credibility in the eyes of others. A person who meets adversity with composed acknowledgement demonstrates inner strength, earning both personal pride and external respect. This composed demeanor does not imply indifference. Rather, it reflects an understanding that emotional stability is more advantageous than dramatic protest in navigating life's inevitable difficulties. Mental energy is a limited resource. When it is consumed by resistance to the unchangeable, little remains for creative thought, strategic planning, or meaningful engagement with opportunities. Acceptance acts as a gatekeeper, preventing unnecessary expenditure of this precious energy. By withdrawing effort from futile battles, one frees the mind to invest in pursuits that yield tangible improvement or genuine fulfillment. Cultural narratives often glorify relentless struggle, portraying resistance as heroic in all circumstances. while determination in the face of changeable obstacles is admirable. Indiscriminate resistance becomes self-destructive when directed toward immovable realities. Wisdom lies in discerning which situations invite effort and which demand acceptance. This discernment prevents the exhaustion that accompanies fighting every tide, allowing strength to be reserved for battles that can actually be won. The practice of acceptance can begin with small, everyday irritations, traffic delays, unexpected expenses, sudden changes in plans. By consciously acknowledging these inconveniences without exaggerated complaint, one trains the mind to respond calmly to larger challenges. Each accepted inconvenience becomes a rehearsal for greater composure, gradually establishing a habit of emotional balance that remains steady even when circumstances grow more severe. Acceptance does not silence ambition or discourage improvement. On the contrary, it refines ambition by directing it toward realistic objectives. When one accepts current limitations, whether they be financial, physical, or situational, goals can be adjusted to align with present capabilities. This alignment prevents the demoralization that occurs when one repeatedly attempts what is presently unattainable. Progress then becomes steady and sustainable rather than erratic and discouraging. Within this disciplined perspective, life's unpredictability loses much of its power to disturb. Events continue to unfold with their usual mixture of fortune and hardship, yet the internal climate remains comparatively serene. By ceasing to demand that reality conform to personal preference, the individual steps out of constant conflict with existence itself, conserving emotional strength and maintaining clarity in moments where others might collapse under the weight of unmet expectations. Distraction is the quiet thief of peace, the subtle architect of stress, and the persistent whisperer of unrest in the human mind. When attention is scattered, the mind becomes a marketplace of competing voices, each clamoring for prominence, each demanding engagement, yet none offering true clarity. Multitasking, though celebrated in modern discourse as a mark of productivity, is in truth a betrayal of presence. It fractures the soul's focus, dilutes energy, and multiplies anxiety. To live with composure, one must learn the profound art of singular attention, the deliberate concentration on the task immediately before the mind, leaving the future and past to their own spheres. The human mind has a remarkable tendency to fragment itself. Thoughts flit like restless birds, moving from one concern to another without pause, often unnoticed until tension has accumulated into a heavy, imperceptible weight. In the pursuit of many simultaneous goals, the soul is stretched thin, its vitality dispersed into fragments, and its capacity for genuine accomplishment diminished. Each distraction, no matter how minor, acts like a crack in a vessel, allowing focus to leak, patience to diminish, and stress to take root in the spaces left behind. Singular attention, by contrast, consolidates energy, preserves clarity, and nurtures a quiet power that becomes impervious to trivial disturbances. Time, the most precious of all resources, is irretrievably lost when divided among too many tasks. A person who attempts to address multiple demands at once discovers that each task receives only a fraction of the mind's vitality, producing work that is less precise, less creative, and less fulfilling. Moreover, the mind itself experiences strain. The effort to toggle between disparate objectives creates a tension that simmers beneath consciousness, manifesting as irritability, fatigue, and an underlying sense of inadequacy. By focusing wholly on one endeavor, the individual aligns effort with intention, producing results of greater quality while simultaneously nurturing the mental serenity that comes from undiluted engagement. The allure of multitasking often lies in the illusion of efficiency, yet this illusion is perilous. True efficiency is not measured by the sheer volume of actions completed, but by the depth and integrity with which each action is undertaken. A mind fully devoted to a single task achieves outcomes far superior to one divided across multiple fronts. The richness of experience, the satisfaction derived from mastery, the subtle joy of incremental progress emerges only when attention is undistracted. When the mind immerses itself entirely in the present endeavor, without fear of what lies beyond its immediate scope. Distraction is not limited to external interruptions. Internal noise, the ceaseless commentary of thoughts, can be equally corrosive. Worries about the future, regrets about the past, and hypothetical scenarios that never materialize invade the present, subtly diverting focus from what is directly actionable. To cultivate singular attention, one must cultivate awareness of this internal turbulence, learning to observe thoughts as passing phenomena rather than invitations to abandon the task at hand. Each intrusion can be acknowledged, assessed, and then set aside, restoring mental clarity and preserving the integrity of engagement. The practice of deliberate presence requires courage, for it challenges habitual patterns of fragmentation. It demands resisting the temptation to chase multiple satisfactions simultaneously, to seek productivity in quantity rather than quality, and to quiet the incessant hum of mental speculation. Yet the reward is profound: a mind that is coherent, a heart that is calm, and an existence that is no longer burdened by the relentless pull of competing demands. In this state, work itself becomes a form of meditation, a channel through which energy flows smoothly and stress is diffused by the very act of concentrated effort. Attention, once disciplined, also transforms perception. A mind fully present to its immediate task sees nuances that a distracted mind would overlook. The texture of an argument, the subtleties of a human interaction, the hidden details of a physical endeavor all become accessible when mental focus is undiluted. This clarity enhances judgment, prevents error, and cultivates a sense of mastery. Stress, which often arises from uncertainty and oversight, is diminished not by removing challenges, but by approaching them with undivided awareness, permitting comprehension and control to flourish simultaneously. The modern world, with its relentless stimuli, is particularly prone to fragmenting attention. Alerts, notifications, constant social exchange, and the endless parade of information create a landscape in which the mind is continually drawn outward, leaving the self unmoored from the present. Each intrusion demands a fragment of focus. Each fragment erodes composure, and over time, the accumulation of such interruptions fosters chronic tension. Singular attention becomes an act of defiance against this torrent, a reclaiming of mental sovereignty that preserves both effectiveness and serenity. Even in the domain of personal reflection, divided focus is a source of stress. To meditate, plan, or problem solve with a mind already preoccupied is to invite confusion and partial understanding. The act of dedicating undivided attention to reflection allows insights to emerge fully, decisions to solidify with confidence, and priorities to crystallize without distortion. This deliberate engagement with the mind's own processes enhances clarity and prevents the mental clutter that so often magnifies the perception of difficulty. Singular attention also nurtures a form of time dilation. When fully present, moments expand, allowing for deeper engagement, richer experience, and a sense of abundance within the constraints of finite hours. Distraction, in contrast, compresses experience, leaving a life that feels hurried, incomplete, and perpetually out of balance. The person who cultivates the habit of attending fully to the present discovers that the world's tempo is less tyrannical, that challenges are more manageable, and that the mind itself is lighter, freer, and more resilient. To cultivate this practice, it is essential to establish boundaries that protect the mind's focus. Intentional pauses, scheduled reflection, and the deliberate minimization of extraneous stimuli serve as guardians of attention. Each interruption that is prevented, each deliberate choice to concentrate rather than scatter, strengthens the mind's capacity for singular engagement. Like a muscle exercised over time, attention grows more powerful, more disciplined, and more resistant to the erosive effects of distraction, transforming what was once a source of stress into a conduit of calm and effectiveness. Presence, once habitual, fosters an intimate connection with life itself. The mundane becomes meaningful, the ordinary becomes rich with detail, and the self experiences the satisfaction of intentional action rather than the exhaustion of fragmented effort. Each moment attended to fully carries its own completeness, and in this completeness, stress finds no fertile ground. By focusing on one task at a time, the mind reclaims its authority, the heart finds relief, and life unfolds with a harmony that distraction has long denied. Desire, when unchecked, is the subtle architect of stress, building invisible chains that bind the mind to ceaseless longing. The human spirit, gifted with imagination, easily conjures visions of what might be possessions, honors, comforts, or recognition, and clings to these visions as though they were guarantees of happiness. Yet every unfulfilled wish, every unmet expectation, becomes a silent weight pressing upon consciousness, a shadow that darkens even the brightest moment. To live with tranquility, one must cultivate simplicity, not as a concession, but as a deliberate and powerful act of liberation, severing the mind's dependence on superfluous want. Simplicity does not imply austerity or deprivation. It is not the rejection of life's richness, but the refinement of focus to essentials, the intentional pruning of desires that produce distraction and discontent. A mind that craves little is not diminished. It is empowered. Each unnecessary longing avoided is a reserve of mental energy preserved, a sanctuary of calm maintained against the encroachment of stress. Those who pursue simplicity discover that the soul's satisfaction grows not from accumulation, but from mastery over desire itself, a sovereignty that no external circumstance can compromise. The illusion of necessity fuels much of human unrest. Objects, accolades, and social affirmation are often mistaken for indispensable elements of well-being, yet their absence rarely threatens life itself. It is the belief in their absolute requirement that generates anxiety. By discerning between genuine need and imagined need, the individual can dismantle countless sources of tension. What is essential health, reason, virtue? Meaningful connection requires no frantic pursuit, no obsessive guarding, no endless tallying of acquisition. Everything beyond this essential circle, though tempting, is discretionary, and freedom lies in recognizing this distinction. Desire magnifies in proportion to the mind's identification with it. When one's sense of self becomes entwined with what is not yet possessed, inner peace becomes contingent on external outcomes, rendering it fragile and precarious. Simplicity severs this dependence. By limiting attachment to things that cannot undermine inner equilibrium, the individual erects a fortress of calm within, impervious to the fluctuations of fortune. The fewer the desires, the fewer the disappointments. The lighter the longing, the less room there is for stress to take root. The pursuit of simplicity cultivates clarity. When the mind is cluttered with countless cravings, judgment becomes clouded, priorities distorted, and decisions burdened by competing appetites. Simplicity functions as a lens, sharpening focus, illuminating the essentials, and exposing the transient nature of peripheral wants. In this clarity, action becomes deliberate rather than reactive, choice guided by discernment rather than impulse, and experience enriched with presence rather than fragmented by longing. Life observed with such attention appears more manageable, more ordered, and less subject to the turbulence of ungoverned desire. Contentment is the natural companion of simplicity. To desire little is not to diminish ambition, but to recalibrate it in alignment with reality. Ambition untethered from necessity or principle fosters restlessness and dissatisfaction, producing stress as it chases shadows. when ambition is guided by values rather than whims, when it seeks growth instead of possession, the mind attains a harmonious balance between aspiration and acceptance. Each fulfilled desire is then appreciated without inflating dependence upon the next, and each unfulfilled desire is met with equanimity, recognized as non-essential to the soul's serenity. The environment, too, responds to simplicity. Physical spaces unburdened by excess create a sense of openness, calm, and ease. Clothing, possessions, and surroundings that are sufficient but not excessive cultivate a mental echo of order, reinforcing the practice of minimal attachment. The eye is not assaulted by clutter, the body is not encumbered by unnecessary weight, and the mind is not distracted by the endless pursuit of more. This harmonious alignment of external and internal simplicity magnifies its effect, producing a pervasive sense of lightness and composure. Simplicity extends beyond material desire to the realm of thought and expectation. Social comparisons, imagined status, and hypothetical achievements often inflate longing far beyond the bounds of necessity. To observe life without the distortions of envy or pretense is to unburden the mind from invisible chains, freeing energy previously consumed in maintaining appearances or envying fortunes. By limiting comparison to essential measures of virtue and personal growth, the individual maintains perspective, reducing the mental friction that breeds frustration and anxiety. Moderation is the practice of simplicity in action. Every indulgence, when excessive, carries the seed of stress food, entertainment, even work when pursued without temperance. By cultivating moderation, one aligns behavior with principle, ensuring that pleasure does not become a source of compulsion and that labor does not devolve into oppressive toil. The mind, accustomed to measured engagement, experiences fewer swings of desire and aversion, navigating life with a steadiness that excessive craving renders impossible. Each deliberate choice to restrain wants strengthens the capacity to remain centered amid uncertainty. The discipline of simplicity transforms the perception of scarcity. Many imagine that happiness resides in accumulation, yet those who have practiced restraint understand that abundance is not measured in quantity, but in satisfaction. The less the mind depends upon external gains, the richer it becomes in resilience, gratitude, and tranquility. Stress, which thrives on perceived lack, loses its foothold in a consciousness that has learned to be content with sufficiency. Desire, once untamed, is tempered into an ally, motivating improvement without dictating emotional well-being. Simplicity cultivates freedom. Each unnecessary desire relinquished is a chain removed. Each attachment moderated is a burden lifted. In this freedom, the mind regains mobility, capable of responding to life's unpredictability without panic or strain. Challenges are met with composure. Changes are absorbed with grace. And the individual discovers that satisfaction can coexist with ambition, pleasure can coexist with restraint, and engagement with the world can occur without surrendering the inner citadel of peace. The practice of simplicity also heightens awareness of true value. By stripping away distractions, the mind perceives more clearly the richness inherent in what is already present, the vitality of the body, the clarity of reason, the depth of human connection, and the quiet satisfaction of purposeful action. The heart learns to cherish what matters rather than chasing what glitters, and the mind rests in the knowledge that fulfillment is cultivated internally, not granted externally. This cultivated appreciation diminishes stress, for the measure of life is no longer imposed by circumstance, but determined by the refinement of desire itself. Over time, the habitual embrace of simplicity generates a profound sense of equilibrium. Mental energy, freed from the endless pursuit of excess, becomes available for reflection, creativity, and engagement with life's essential endeavors. Emotional responses are tempered, decisions are more deliberate, and resilience grows, fortified by the absence of unnecessary dependence. Stress, which feeds on fragmentation, indulgence, and endless longing, finds little sustenance in a consciousness guided by discernment and sufficiency. The mind, unexamined, becomes a labyrinth where chaos quietly accumulates, its corridors crowded with unfinished thoughts, unresolved emotions, and unacknowledged errors. Daily reflection is the lantern that illuminates this labyrinth, revealing both the brilliance and the blind spots of our character. It is a practice not of self-reproach, but of vigilant stewardship over the inner world, a deliberate act of attending to the soul with precision, honesty, and care. Without it, life drifts, reactive and scattered. With it, life becomes intentional, deliberate, and infused with clarity. Reflection begins with a simple yet profound question. How have I acted today? Not the outward actions alone, but the intentions, the choices, the impulses that underlie each gesture and word. Did my actions align with the principles I claim to honor? Did my speech reflect reason and fairness, or did it reveal haste, irritation, or vanity? Did I respond to difficulty with composure, or did I surrender to frustration? These inquiries are not rhetorical. They are tools for mapping the terrain of character, exposing areas of vulnerability, and identifying opportunities for growth. To examine oneself daily requires courage, for it demands a willingness to confront imperfections without flinching. Human nature often seeks distraction, rationalization, or self-deception, but the vigilant mind refuses to indulge in these comforts. Instead, it observes with equanimity, cataloging lapses not to berate, but to learn. Each misstep becomes data for refinement, each emotional eruption a signal for future correction. Through consistent attention, the soul develops a form of self-guidance that no external circumstance can dislodge, a compass pointing steadily toward integrity and composure. Honest reflection nurtures responsibility. Stress often arises from deflecting blame, avoiding accountability, or imagining that outcomes are determined solely by external forces. By confronting personal choices daily, the mind acknowledges its role in the creation of both ease and turmoil. This acknowledgement is not a burden but a liberation. When we recognize that much of our discomfort stems from avoidable reactions, we gain the power to adjust, to intervene, and to prevent recurrence. Responsibility transforms the individual from a passive sufferer of circumstance into an active architect of inner stability. Reflection also clarifies priorities. Life offers an abundance of options, obligations, and distractions, yet time is finite and energy is limited. Daily self-examination forces the mind to differentiate between what is essential and what is trivial. Which actions advanced virtue, wisdom, or meaningful purpose? Which were indulgences in vanity, fear, or fleeting pleasure? By cataloging these distinctions, the mind cultivates discernment, directing attention and effort where they yield the greatest value, while releasing the unnecessary weight that clutters consciousness and amplifies stress. In the act of reflection, language becomes a mirror of thought. To articulate internally the nuances of the day to name impulses, identify reactions, and evaluate choices is to clarify perception. Vague regrets become precise lessons. Unrecognized tensions gain definition. Fleeting successes are acknowledged and internalized. The mind that speaks to itself with specificity sharpens its own understanding, reducing the fog of uncertainty that so often magnifies stress. Each evening, as the mind surveys its actions with deliberate attention, it constructs a map for improvement, a record that guides future conduct. Equally important is the cultivation of gratitude within reflection. The practice is not solely a catalog of errors or challenges. It is an acknowledgement of virtue, accomplishment, and the subtle blessings that life provides. Gratitude balances critique with appreciation, tempering self-judgment with recognition of progress. By observing both strengths and weaknesses, the individual develops a nuanced understanding of self, one that is neither inflated by pride nor crushed by self-reproach. This balance fosters resilience, allowing the mind to encounter adversity with steadiness and composure. The rhythm of daily reflection creates continuity. Without it, lessons are often lost, emotions unprocessed, and patterns repeated unconsciously. With it, experience becomes cumulative, each day contributing to the refinement of judgment, the strengthening of character, and the cultivation of inner harmony. Stress diminishes because the mind is no longer adrift in an uncharted sea of impulsive responses. It navigates life with a growing internal map, anticipating pitfalls, recognizing recurring patterns, and intervening before minor disturbances escalate into disproportionate anxiety. Reflection sharpens self-awareness, which is the cornerstone of emotional mastery. By observing responses to challenges, one recognizes triggers that provoke fear, anger, or impatience. These triggers, once identified, lose much of their power. Awareness transforms instinctive reaction into deliberate choice. When provocation arises, the mind, tempered by consistent examination, can pause, assess, and respond with discernment rather than reflex. Stress, which thrives on unexamined reactions, loses its foothold in a consciousness that practices vigilant observation. Furthermore, daily reflection fosters humility. The mind learns to recognize its limitations, its lapses, and its imperfections without succumbing to despair. Humility is not weakness. It is an acknowledgement of reality, a foundation for wise adjustment. By observing one's own errors and tempering pride with insight, the individual cultivates patience, perspective, and a measured approach to both personal ambition and interpersonal relations. This grounded awareness diminishes the anxiety that arises from imagined perfection, unfulfilled expectation, or inflated self-conception. The practice of reflection also cultivates foresight. By reviewing the past with honesty, the mind anticipates future challenges with clarity. Patterns of behavior become visible, potential pitfalls are recognized, and strategies for self-regulation emerge. Anticipation is not prediction. It is preparedness grounded in understanding. Stress is reduced because the unknown is approached with experience as a guide, uncertainty tempered by insight, and action informed by consistent observation of one's own tendencies. Over time, daily self-examination strengthens the mind's autonomy. It creates a sanctuary of reason within which decisions are guided, less by external pressures or transient emotions and more by internal wisdom. Challenges are confronted with deliberate focus, responsibilities accepted with measured diligence, and opportunities pursued with clarity of intention. Life, observed through the lens of reflection, loses its chaotic edge, and the individual experiences a profound internal stability, the kind that cannot be shaken by fortune, opinion, or circumstance. Reflection is, above all, a dialogue with the self that cultivates mastery. By confronting actions, intentions, and impulses daily, the individual builds a continuous feedback loop that refines judgment, enhances virtue, and fortifies resilience. The mind becomes a cultivated garden where each day's attention weeds out destructive tendencies, plants seeds of wisdom, and nourishes the growth of composure. Stress diminishes because it cannot thrive in a consciousness that is intentional, self-aware, and guided by reasoned thought through the disciplined practice of daily reflection. One discovers that life's burdens are not external inevitabilities, but internal responses within the scope of one's own governance. By observing oneself with honesty, precision, and compassion, the mind achieves a clarity that transforms challenges into lessons, errors into guidance, and fleeting successes into durable confidence. In this ongoing practice, the individual constructs a life of deliberate intention, resilience, and serenity, cultivating an inner citadel that remains steadfast amidst the tumult of the world. Daily reflection therefore, is not a mere habit but a lifeline. It is the continual shaping of the mind, the measured polishing of character, and the deliberate cultivation of composure. Those who embrace it discover that stress is not an inescapable force of circumstance, but a malleable condition within the governance of disciplined observation. By examining each day with unwavering attention, the individual becomes both artist and architect of their inner life, crafting a consciousness where peace, clarity, and strength are cultivated daily and maintained steadfastly.